Hello and welcome to the Mind Your Faith podcast, the podcast where we create the bridge from struggle to success. Each episode features a special guest who will speak about a hardship or mental health issue that they have gone through and how their faith helped them. These guests will share their story, coping skills, and ways to conquer. I know you'll love it. Let's get into the episode. My name is Mailee Minitello, and I am the host of the Mind Your Faith podcast. For today's episode, we have a very special guest. I know that you will love her. Today, we'll be discussing the topic of going through an eating disorder. Our guest will be discussing what it means to overcome this and see yourself the way God sees you. The behaviors and emotions that go with eating disorders are challenging to go through, especially when you embark on a new chapter of your life, such as college. Today's guest is a pastor at my church and serves as a role model for me and many others around her. I am inspired by her and I'm always excited when I get to learn new things from her. Today's guest is going to talk about her experience going through her mental and physical struggles from an eating disorder, and I know y'all are going to be impacted by this powerful story. Allow me to introduce you to Leydanis Ritchie. Thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Mailee, I'm so excited to be here. Really honored that you asked me to be on your podcast. Just really excited to see what you're doing and all that God is going to do through you. I know that this podcast is going to reach so many people and truly make a difference. So thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm so excited. Thank you for saying yes. I'm honored to have you on here. I already touched on what we'll be talking about today, but if you want to just start on the beginning and just tell us your story.
Yep. So my name is Leydanis, but I go by Leydanis Ritchie, and I'm a mom of 4 beautiful boys. They are 8, 6, 3, and 7 months. I've got lots of kids. And back when I was younger in high school, I used to play lots of sports. I did volleyball. Surprisingly, I did basketball. I don't know if I would say I played it, but they somehow continued to put me on the court. I did flag football, and I was just really always into sports and into the gym. And I would say I was an athlete. I think my husband would beg to differ, but just being aware of my physical health was always a big part of who I was growing up. And then when I went to college, I ended up playing like college club volleyball. And one of the things as I stepped away from high school sports, a big focus became just the gym. So it was something that just started as a way for me to stay in shape. And then eventually it became almost like an unhealthy, obsessive disorder with the gym, where it was like I could not, my whole life revolved around the gym. If it meant that I would miss the gym, I would say no just so that I would go get a workout in. And over time, I just realized I just kept trying to compare myself. And no matter how hard I worked out, it just was not enough. So at this point, I was going to the gym every day. I was really mindful of what I ate. And I kid you not, I had what society would say I looked the best that I ever would in my life when I was in college, those 4 years. And somehow it still just wasn't enough. And I just continued to look at the mirror, and I was just really dissatisfied with what I saw, and it just wasn't who I wanted to be. And eventually what happened during my college years was I developed an eating disorder, and I became bulimic, where I would barely eat. And then even if I would eat, I would force myself to throw up. And even if it was like a banana, I would force myself to throw up. And this is something that I dealt with for most of my college career. And I dealt with it just by myself. I didn't really talk to anyone. I didn't share with anyone at this time. I really didn't have a relationship with the Lord. My mom, and she put us in a Christian school when we were younger. So we grew up in a Christian household, but it was never like church was a priority. It was kind of just some of the things that we did. So as we grew older, it was definitely a relationship that became distant. I knew there was a God. I believed in God, but it wasn't, I think I would only pray when things were going really bad. It wasn't an actual relationship that I had with the Lord like I do now. So I struggled with that. And eventually at one point I just said, after college, I think it was, just maybe a few months after, I was like, I'm not going to suffer with this anymore. And surprisingly, I kind of just worked through it. But I think part of that was because I became pregnant and I was expecting our first baby. So that was really hard in itself, because at that point, I remember just my whole body changing. So I think when we think of an eating disorder, we automatically go and we think of just the young women that are suffering, but there's a lot of women and first time moms that are just kind of struggling with what they look like when they go through motherhood, when they become pregnant, when they have their first child. They definitely don't look like who they used to look like anymore. And for some, that's something that they forget and they kind of lose their identity. And I remember that's kind of how I felt. I was just really lost with who I was. I saw my body change drastically. Um, Having a baby, obviously you put on some weight. There's a lot of stretch marks that I got. And I remember that first year after I had Caden, my oldest, I was just really dissatisfied with what I looked like. Like there was just no way that I could even see myself being content with who I was. And once we had our first child, Dylan and I, my husband, we slowly started going back to church. And that was when we recommitted our lives to Jesus. And it was in that season where, right before that, I just remember I kept looking at myself every time I would try something on. And I was always criticizing what I looked like. I was never satisfied. I just felt so ugly on the outside, but God did a work on the inside when I recommitted my life that He made me. I fell in love not with just who He was, but I fell in love with who He created me to be. And I remember looking at myself at one point. Now at this point, I've had maybe two kids. Like my body has changed drastically. There's no way I looked like that college girl, that society would have said, like, look at her body. She looks great. She's almost got abs. She's so fit. I looked nothing like that. But I just remember just being so confident in who God made me to be. And it actually had nothing to do with what I looked like physically. But in my mind, I had settled on the word of God. I had settled on his truth, and I knew that he made no mistake when he made me. And it was just almost like he opened my eyes and I was able to see who I truly was. And I realized that it had nothing to do with what I looked like on the outside. And now, don't get me wrong, I think taking care of your physical health is super important. I'm a firm believer, like, if you don't like something, you change it, you work for it. We can't sit here and say we're dissatisfied with our health, with our physical appearance, if we're not actually doing anything to make a difference. But what I learned is that my worth was not on what I looked like. And my worth was on who God called me to be. And now, 4 years later, not 4 years, 4 kids later, my body has gone through so many changes, so many times. And I remember, every time I got pregnant, it was like, oh gosh, what is this going to do to my body? And this last pregnancy, I was just there was not a worry in my mind. There was no doubt that who God called me to be wasn't dependent on what I looked like. And I just knew that God was calling me to more. And there was just a confidence that came in me. So even as, we closed this chapter of our life of having kids, like I've never been more happy with what I look like than I am now. And it's because I know the God that made me. And it actually has nothing to do with my physical appearance, but more to do with knowing that we serve a God who loves us so deeply, that he's planned out our future. He knew what we would look like, and to think that he made a mistake would be to question how good of a God he is. So yeah, that's
Dang,
my
that
story.
was beautiful. I loved it when you were talking about, like, it doesn't matter what your like outward appearance looks like. It's all about inward. And once you allowed God, like, kind of sort of like back into your inward appearance, like your outward appearance, you were able to
Yeah,
like see yourself in like the way God sees you,
yeah.
which is awesome. That's cool. My next question was going to be, where did you find God present within this time? You kind of touched on that with, like, re-getting back into the church, but anything else you wanted to speak about that?
So it was really just having a relationship with God. I can't tell you it happened overnight where, like, one day I just woke up and I was like, yeah, this is great. Like, it never happened that way.
Hmm.
But it happened over time where I started to just really get into the word and have a better understanding of who God was, and then just really an understanding of who God made me to be. That I knew that, God has called us. He's chosen us. So why would I ever think that he made a mistake? And I think when I started walking confidently in that calling that God gave me, it actually didn't matter what I looked like or what I thought I looked like. You know, I stopped comparing myself to what I thought I was supposed to look like, to women on the internet, to just people that weren't me. And I just had this understanding like, no, like God has called me to be me. And it just kind of, over time is this boldness that he instilled in me to know like he's got plans for me. He's got something for me to do. And I think that's the same for every person. Like God's got a plan for each and every one of us. And when we stay in our lane and we know what God has called us to do, it's really hard to compare ourselves to what other people are doing, what they look like. And it just makes it really easy to be confident in who he's called us to be.
Wow, wow. That is just a great way to word that. Like wow. Yeah, I know when you came and spoke, at least at my school for FCA, like I had a couple, since like, me and a couple of my friends are like the captains, I had a couple people like come to us and be like, wow, like that, because you were like our first guest that like kind of like came in and was like, talk about like your experience, like, and it was just awesome because um, I don't know if it's just that every other guest is just like, I don't know, more coming from this like head pastoral, I don't
Mhm.
know, like type or just, I don't know, but it was, you hit somewhere different and it was just great. Um,
Good. I'm glad. I think this is something that so many people struggle with and it's unspoken. And I don't think it's just with the young girls.
yeah.
High school is it's a really hard age and it's really harder when you don't know who you are. But when you're confident in who God called you to be, I think that really helps young women navigate through those years. And you just have an understanding of each person has been given a grace to do things, to look certain
Hmm.
ways, to accomplish certain things. So it will really just remove this idea of comparing yourselves to one another. But I do think this is something women struggle with, and not just women who just had a baby, like women whose kids are grown and they felt like they never got back to who they used to be and who God had called them to be. So I think this is an issue that a lot of women actually struggle with, and maybe haven't even been able to put words to what they feel, what those emotions are. Like when I think of women that just had a baby, like they're so lost in motherhood and in this understanding of who they are. They don't even look like themselves anymore.
Hmm.
But God just put such a grace in those seasons and he reminds us like who he's called us to be and how he's equipped us for those seasons. So I think when we talk about eating disorders, there's just a lot of women that still struggle with it. And our heart is that they would just know that God made no mistake. He
Hmm.
loves us. And I
Yeah.
think that's what I hope people get out of this today.
Yeah. Everyone's path looks different, but God is walking on that path with us,
Yep.
and we just gotta, find him and grasp onto him.
Yep.
Awesome. Um, this question goes like kind of hand in hand with the last one, but it was, how did God slash the church community help you through this time in your life slash continues to help you today?
Oh, I don't know where I would be without the church. The church saved my life. If it wasn't for the church, I don't think I would have ever been able to come back to the Lord. So if you're not in a church, this is not a plug for Coast Life. I love my church, but there are incredible churches all around our area.
Mm.
And the church provided a space for me to come to know Jesus. And what the church did is it surrounded me with women who are some of the most incredible women in my life, that they are role models, and we all come in different shapes and sizes.
Mm-hmm.
But each single woman that I have in my life plays a crucial role in it. And it's because I found my community. And, my family, I'm from Miami, so we grew up in Miami. My whole family is in Miami. I have no blood family here. My in-laws, they were the closest ones we had here, and they actually moved away. So the only person I have here that's related to me is my sister and her husband. So when we got to church, we had nobody. The relationships that we did have outside of church, they were actually not healthy relationships. They weren't relationships that were actually moving us forward. Instead, they were holding us back. So who you surround yourself with matters. And when we got planted into the church, we got surrounded by people that we knew we wanted to do life with. But these people all made a difference in our life, whether it was the words they spoke, whether it was the way they led their life, whether it was the way they raised their children, whether it was what their marriage looked like. So by being in community, we really just had an understanding of godly community, godly friends, godly relationships, what godly parenting looks like, what a godly marriage looks like. And it was almost like God gave us this fresh perspective of what our future could look like. And it was through that where I saw women just walking confidently and boldly in who God called them to be. And I realized like God has something for me. And I always think of even in Romans, I'm sorry, Second Corinthians, it says, not that we dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who are commending themselves, but when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they are without understanding. But we will not boast beyond limits, but we will boast only with regard to the area of influence God assigned to us to reach even to you. And this is Second Corinthians 10, 12 to 13. And it was, I feel like what I had this constant battle of what people were doing, who I wanted to look like, and I kept comparing myself to one another. And when I got surrounded by godly community, I realized that there was no need to compare, that there was actually enough room at the table for each of us. I didn't need to one up
Wow.
someone. I didn't need to kick someone out of their seat, remove their seat from under them. Like actually God had given me a table at the seat just for me. And it was by being surrounded in that community that I realized that each and every person brought value and they spoke into me, but then I also had a role in their lives. And God used those moments and those relationships so that I could just kind of continue to just flourish and thrive into the woman that He was calling me to be.
Wow. And for the listeners out there, if you do not know, if you don't go to Coast Life, but the like minute you go on the campus, you will meet a Richie because Lay's and her sister Lady and Pastor Dylan and Pastor Trevor, they're just the best people ever, and I cannot believe how close you all are. Like that's awesome.
We
And
are literally best friends.
that is incredible. I love that.
And we have 8 kids total together, which is a lot of Richie kids.
That's crazy. But yeah, if you do not know them, you will love them once you meet them. Um, what would you say were your most helpful coping mechanisms throughout this your entire journey?
A lot of it was honestly being in community. I can't tell you how many times, like the women that I surround myself with, we don't let each other talk negative about about ourselves. If we give a compliment, and one of us tries to like direct the compliment as something else, like, oh, my hair looks great. Well, yeah, I did this, that. Like, no, we've learned like you say thank you. Like
That's
you receive the
awesome.
compliment, you receive the words of affirmation. And a lot of times, sometimes insecurity, what it truly is pride. So we think
Mhm.
pride is it comes in two forms. One is just through insecurity, because you actually don't value the people's voices in your life to accept what they're saying. So
Mhm.
that's something that we've challenged ourselves in, is like, if you get a compliment, you say thank you and you
Yeah.
receive those words of affirmation. And then a lot of it is just my relationship with the Lord. I can't tell you whether it was something that was preached on a Sunday, whether it was something that I read in the Bible. It was just this understanding, like when I felt overwhelmed, okay, put worship music on or read
Mhm.
my Bible, pray. If there's nights that I can't sleep and my mind is tossing and turning, and through all of that, it was just the Lord's guidance, like just starting to
Um,
understand like who God made me to be and not trying to be anybody else. Like, I can't sing. You could be like,
mhm.
Lace, I'll give you $1 million if you go on that stage. And I'm like, no, that's not what I've been graced with. So I don't
Mhm.
try to be a singer. You know what I'm saying? I've learned what God
Yeah.
has graced me, and I've learned what God has called me to do. And now I'm just confident in those areas to
Mhm.
really just kind of pass and defeat that comparison game, or pass and defeat the negative self-talk, pass and defeat the mind game, the mental health of like, are you good enough? Do you look like her? You could look better. You could look like this. And it's just really having this understanding, like I'm putting action to my words in the sense of if I'm not happy with something, what can I do personally to make it better? Right. But I'm also just having an understanding of who I am. And it's like, I can't tell you that I'm there. I can't tell you that every day I wake up and I'm like, I'm great. This is great. I love everything. No, is every day is a day. You have to work towards it. And that's kind of what our walk with Christ is. We're not always on the mountaintop. Like sometimes we're in the valley. And if we're not in the valley, how would we appreciate the view from the top?
Mm-hmm.
If you've never been in the bottom looking up, how would you be able to stand at the mountaintop and be like, wow, I've been waiting to get here. Wow, that was really high up. Wow, I worked really hard for this if you were never at the bottom. So some days are mountaintop days, some days are valley days, but each day is a moving forward day.
Wow, I love the way you put that. That's awesome. It's like kind of reminds me of like hiking up a mountain. Like on the hike, it might
You
be
made
tough.
it.
Yeah, you do
It's
not want to be walking up
hard.
the mountain.
You're heaving, and then everyone wants to say hi to you, and you're like, you're saying hi happy because you're coming down. I don't
Yeah,
want to keep going.
exactly.
But if it wasn't hard, then we wouldn't enjoy the view at the top
It makes it
because
that
it would
much
be
better.
something, yeah, you could do that every day. But no, you need the endurance, you need to persevere, you need to put the work, you need to put the action so that when you get to the top, you can sit back and be like, I did it. I
Yes,
got
yeah.
here.
Yes, I love that. I remember at Surge Conference, it was during, I believe it was the first altar call of the weekend, and I was just up there, and I believe it was Haley Yadon came and she prayed, and she was just like, I pray that you just help her see the way God sees her, and just help her on like, all her journeys and her endeavors, and just be with her, and always like remind her that you're with her. And I really like, I felt that, and it was just like, kind of connected to like what you were saying, like see yourself the way God sees you, and like not, don't give in to like whatever the devil is saying, or,
Yep.
the inward.
The negative
Yeah.
self-talk. Yep.
hmm Yeah. Um, how would you say going through something like this shaped you into the person you are today?
Something that I've been saying a lot lately is you either win or you learn. A lot of times we think we may lose, but every time that you lose, you actually end up learning something. There's always a lesson that's taught. So even through, I think my struggles with who I was has actually allowed me to love who I am even more. To give grace to the young girl who thought that God made a mistake, who thought that she wasn't worthy, who thought that she couldn't be loved, who thought that she had to look a certain way to be accepted, who thought that she had to be a certain weight so that she could, get married and start a family, who she had to look a certain way to gain influence, look a certain way to make a difference. Like what I learned through all of that is that none of that actually matters if God's not in it. Because I could have made an influence, but who was I influencing?
hmm
What was I leading them back to? And it's just this understanding of I want to give grace to the person that I was, but I've also learned that there are going to be other people, and I know that God will use these stories and use what I went through so that other women don't waste as much time as I did not loving themselves, so that they could step confidently and boldly into who they are and into the call that God has placed on their life.
Wow, that's cool. Um, all right. Are there any final comments or anything to add that you feel my audience needs to hear?
Um, let's see. God made no mistake.
Mm,
Um,
yes.
each person has been made uniquely. Our God is a good father. He
hmm
loves us no matter what we look like, no matter what we do, no matter who we are. And I think when we can have the understanding that we are uniquely made, like the world does not need me to be anybody else because God made me to
Yes.
be Leydanis Ritchie. The world does not need you to be anybody else other than you. Because if you were someone else, then who would be you? Who
Mm-hmm.
would fill the role that God has called and placed on your life to fill in this earth if you're so busy being someone else? There is no one that can fill your role. There's no one that can fill your shoes. And I think when each person has an understanding that God has called them for a purpose, that God has placed them on this earth for a reason, that God made no mistake, then they can walk boldly and confidently in who they are and not try to be anybody else.
Wow. All right. I ask every guest at the end of my episodes which Bible verse is their favorite and what's their favorite worship song.
Okay, worship songs. There are so many
Everybody
right
says
now
this.
that
They
are
give me like
out.
three.
So I love Abba by Gateway Worship. And it's just this idea that our whole life is just to glorify God. Our heart's desire, just everything we do would be to glorify God and lift up the name of the Lord. And then my favorite Bible verse is, so though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. Psalm 27:3. That's actually going to be my next tattoo. But I just love this scripture of just this idea of dwelling in the house of the Lord, and I just want to be found faithful in the house, to build God's house, to move God's house forward. So my heart is to dwell in the house of the Lord for all the days of my life.
Wow, that's so good. And it really connects with the story. I love that.
Yep. Even
Um,
then, I will be confident.
I love
Yep.
that. Where can we all follow you and continue to see you?
Um, Post Life Church, be there.
Yes.
But you guys can follow me on Instagram. I'm really not an influencer. You'll just get lots of pictures of my beautiful boys. I do have 4 boys. I don't know if I said that. Not just not just 4 kids, but there are 4 boys. And I always think that's so interesting that God has blessed me with 4 boys, and no girls. So I'm interested to see how this all plays out because I love helping women and young girls. And I know that one day my children will get married and I'll get 4 beautiful bonus daughters. So I'm looking forward to that. But right now we're just getting them through pre-K, and writing their alphabet. We'll hold off on that. But you can just follow me on social media, Instagram. I don't even know what my handle is. I'm sorry, guys. I'm
It'll be
30.
it'll be in the show notes. So
Okay, cool. But yeah, would love to have you guys join me and just keep track of our family and all that God is doing in it.
yes. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. This was so fun. Really excited just for you to be kicking this off.
Thank you. Yes, I knew a little bit of your story, but this was so impactful to learn like the bigger picture and like learning it all, and it's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing with us also.
You are
And
welcome.
just thank you. I mean, this was great.
You're welcome. I'm honored to be on it.
Also, thank you guys for listening. Your support means the world to me. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you choose to listen. Also, the video of the filming of this podcast episode will be uploaded to my YouTube channel, Mind Your Faith Podcast. And follow the Instagram at Mind Your Faith Podcast to stay up to date and catch the exclusive content on there. Please share with family and friends to continue the growth. Thank you all so much for listening. I'm so grateful for all of you. Remember, you're not alone if you mind your faith and keep your faith in mind. Jesus loves you. Peace out, y'all.